Hi, Jendella. Hi, Jendella. Hi, Jendella.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi guys. How you all doing?
We're doing great. We're doing great. Welcome
We're
to
good, thank you.
the Ottawa Black Book Club.
Thank
Uh,
you.
my name is Louisa Ibaze. You must have seen my first name, Olunosen. So I'm the founder of this book club. We are in day before yesterday was our fourth anniversary, actually. So yeah,
Oh, happy anniversary.
yeah. So we're happy to have you. We have 45 minutes with you. So we are going to jump into the book. First of all, Glory. Look, I struggled to like her. I struggled. But why was she so annoying? Why? So please go ahead. So first of all, Jendella, that name I've never heard before. Talk to us about your name, Jendella, and what inspired you to write this book.
Okay, so my first name, Jendella, is actually a nickname that stuck. So that's not my that's not the birth and that's not what my family called me, but it was a nickname that stuck that I've had since I was about 15. So it just made sense to kind of run with it as my pen name. And what inspired me to write the book was I think a lot of the angst about being a second generation like British Nigerian, kind of that tension between like that generational tension between your your parents expectation and your own kind of desires, and also that the gap in understanding that often happens between generations. So I think that's really what inspired me. That's why I was writing the book. I was kind of writing through my own maybe emotions and feelings about it. I always say when I first started, I think I first started in 2017. So when I first started, I was more Glory. By the end of writing the book, I felt more Faith. So that was so yeah, it was like my own kind of journey and asking a lot of questions and interrogating a lot of the things that yeah, I felt like were questions in my mind as a second generation Nigerian British person.
Okay, so and I'm looking at the cultural contrast because I did my postgrad in the UK and I would
Yeah.
always go to Peckham to braid my hair.
Yeah.
So took me back, to the streets of Peckham. But it's interesting, the culture clash. So these are parents. I mean, we've always had Yoruba families in the UK since forever.
Yeah.
So parents came to this country to get a better life and all of that. Of course, your children are going to grow up in this country and in this culture.
Yeah.
You expect them to have this very, very Nigerian way of behaving and Nigerian values. Talk to us
Yeah.
about that. Because I see that in a lot of the aunties and the expectations, nuances here and there.
Yeah, I think that there's there's an interesting dynamic where you've grown up in a completely different culture to this culture that you're bringing up your child in. So I suspect that there's maybe on one level there's a fear of this new culture and how this new culture might quote unquote corrupt or change your child. So you want to hold on to the values that you think matter, that you think make you a good person. And then I think there's also a fear in terms of maybe not knowing your child, not knowing this generation, like when there are those kind of like gaps in understanding, like I think there might be a bit of fear in terms of who is this person that I'm raising and how is perhaps our relationship completely different to the relationship that I had with my parents, where we for the most part lived and grew up in the same kind of like cultural environment. So I think there's a lot of different like tensions and stresses, and then there's just the stress of being an immigrant in a hostile kind of society and trying to make your way and trying to like just establish yourself and see that the investment that you've made in terms of uprooting your whole life is actually worth it. And when you see your child perhaps veering down a track that you did not plan for them, there's a lot of questions there about, was this really worth it? Like, did I make the right choice? Should I have chosen differently? Is it my fault that my child is in this situation, or all that kind of stuff? So I think that yeah, it's something that I have always wondered in terms of where I think my parents were pretty all right with kind of our cultural differences. But for context, my dad was born in Nigeria, but he grew up in the UK. So I think that there was a lot more familiarity perhaps with kind of crossing that culture. But I had other aunties and uncles who would just that with me, and they'll be so confused that me and my brother were so British. And it's like, well, like where we've been, like where else have we been living? Like we've been to, since leaving Nigeria, maybe we've been back a handful of times. Like who else would we be but the person that we are right now? But there would still be this kind of like, oh, you don't greet us properly, you don't do this, you don't do that, da, da, da. And it's kind of like, I think from a child perspective, it's just like, what, like who do you want me to be? Like I can only be the person that I am. So I think that is a tension that I hope is kind of, I think as maybe Nigerian families are here for longer, there's less maybe expectation from that. But I think definitely growing up, I felt from older uncles and aunties that kind of like, why are you not Nigerian enough? But then at the same time, we know you're not Nigerian and we or Nigerian enough, and we'll take the mick out of the fact that you're very British, but still, why are you not Nigerian enough? It's like that, yeah, that
Well,
confusion.
I think it's a Nigerian. Let me not say it's just a Nigerian thing. I think it's an African thing where aunties give unsolicited advice. We are all guilty of that. I used to be guilty of that, and I'm still working on myself in regards to that. You know how someone comes and says, "Oh, this is the problem I'm having." Then I go into my advisor mode. Then I check myself. I'm like, none of your business. Oh, yeah. So here you touched on, I don't know if it's to call it adoption or caring, that system.
Yeah.
I remember when I worked at William Hill. I worked at William Hill for a while, and there was this Yoruba girl I had met there who told me that she was raised by a white family, and I didn't understand that. So I asked her, so where were your parents when this was going on? I said, they were going to school, they were doing other things. And I didn't have time to do my research on that to find out why it was like that. So I said I was going to ask you, was it adoption or was it the British society finding a way to help immigrants? Were there cases of abuse in this situation? Because hearing of a lot of Black children being raised by white families or being taken care of by white families, were they doing that to Asian kids? Or is it this still savior mentality? Because that is one thing we struggle with, this savior mentality. Oh, we are helping these people, these savages. What was it about? What was it about? I still need to do my research on that.
Yeah. So I think so the official term for it is private fostering. So in the UK there's obviously the official like social services and like fostering like legal situation, but all of these arrangements were basically not done through the government. They were more done on, it might be literally adverts in kind of like specialist magazines around like childcare. It might be through word of mouth, but it was not kind of like a formalized thing. And the euphemistic term is private fostering. It's actually illegal now in the UK, and part of the reason why it became illegal is because there were some horrific cases of abuse where children were placed in the care of people who are not their family, but no one, like schools, the council, they didn't know anything about it. And then they would find out that children would, there's one very the kind of like pivotal case was a child called Victoria Klimbier, who was, I believe she was from the Ivory Coast. She was a young child who was actually placed with a I think it was kind of like a great aunt or maybe like a friend of the family. And she was actually abused to the point where she died. And that was kind of a turning point in legislation where like all kind of private off the books arrangements are now completely illegal in schools. Part of the safeguarding is looking out for the signs of a child living with family who like living apart from their parents, and there's not like a formal social care monitored kind of arrangement. So but it went back as far as the 50s, and there's so many reasons why this happened. So obviously back in Nigeria, it happened, I mean, Nigeria, I've heard it happening with Nigerian children, Ghanaian children, and also some Zimbabwean children as well, particularly Tsitsi Dangarengba, the Zimbabwean author. Her recent collection of essays addresses her own experience of this in the UK. I don't know, it wasn't very common amongst Asian communities as far as I'm aware, but part of the reason is that when people were coming to the UK to, first of all, a lot of Africans came for education, and there was a lot of issues around the first wave of Africans that came were mostly men, and they had a lot of mental health problems around kind of just the horrible society that they were living in. So the government then invited them to bring their families over so that hopefully that would help them, because a lot of the men who were going through these mental health issues were actually became quite dangerous or quite violent. So to kind of try and stop them going that far, they said, okay, bring your family so you have a sense of community. But then obviously wives come and then you have children, but wives are also probably in school or working, and without that wider family network that you might have back in Nigeria, for example, where are your children? If you're at school from say 9 o'clock to 5 p.m. and then you have to go and do a job afterwards, where you have a wider family network back home who can help you with childcare. In the UK, you don't have that network. So part of the solution that rose up was this private fostering. It's interesting how a lot of the families who would privately foster were actually white working class British families, and they did it for the money. Some of them obviously did enjoy children, and they might be nannies, or they might have a background or a professional kind of experience of childcare, but they were paid to raise these children and kind of look after them. Some arrangements were maybe Monday to Friday, and then on the Friday the child would go with the family. Some of them were kind of for longer, depending on the family situation. So it was basically an industry that arose to meet this needs that a lot of these West African and other African families had, where they didn't have a wider network to support them with the care of their children. And this carried on right up through, as I said, to the 90s, to the early 2000s, when this horrible case with Victoria Kimberley kind of brought this whole history to light, and the government said this cannot go on, which obviously we can understand why. But there have been stories of abuse. There have been just general stories of just being a black child in a very white environment. You're at a very vulnerable age. You might be staying with people who are completely racist, but your parents don't know this. You might be staying with people who are, for the most part, okay, but they're around race. They have racist family members, and they're in a racist environment. There's a film called Farming. I can't remember the director's name, but it's based on his own experience, which was absolutely in kind of Essex, absolutely like harrowing experience of being privately fostered, and then his family kind of tried to bring him back to Nigeria, and he couldn't like acclimatize, like that kind of like it was a very kind of confusing time. But then there are also stories where children chose to stay with their foster families, and that's when adoption did come in, because say if a parent has, because some of these parents were working in the UK, but then as time went on and it got to kind of like the 90s, there then became this idea that, oh, well, this is a way for children to get like a Western education or like Western acclimatization. So some wealthy Nigerian families would leave their child in a foster family and then go back to Nigeria, kind of come back to collect their child. And some of the children said, I don't know who you are. Like, these are my parents that I've been raised with. I don't want to go with you. And there are stories of children who chose to stay with their fostered families, and they kind of refused to go back to their biological parents on a full-time basis. So yeah, I guess that's kind of like a general overview of the history, but it's quite an interesting. I think it really speaks to the challenges of immigration, of migration, of not having a family support network, and a lot of the issues that created the climate where this happened. It still, like, we still have those issues today with childcare. Like, childcare is still not affordable. Childcare is still very expensive. And while, as far as I know, private fostering and all these kind of things are obviously kind of like illegal now, like families are still trying to work out how to look after children, especially newly migrated families, and even families who've been here for a while, but due to like gentrification, due to like just the cost of living, like our communities are becoming more disparate. So you can't simply like drop your child at your friend's house who's down the road, or with your parents who live like half an hour away, because your parents actually live in another city because you had to move because you couldn't afford to buy a house in London. So now you live 2 hours away. So it's I think, yeah, even though it doesn't happen now, I think the sentiment that kind of made that whole private fostering thing happen, like it still lives on today. It's still something that a lot of families are struggling with.
Okay, because I remember the most popular case we have is John Fashanu. I think
Yes, John.
older
Yeah.
brother, yes, were raised by a white family, but I started to question identity crisis. Sometimes people experiencing identity crisis and so on. Okay,
Yeah.
let me go to, before I come back to Hope, Julian. So I
Yeah.
just felt there were just a lot of potholes there. That story was hanging. Julian's story. Like, I want to know more about Julian. He was too street for me. But this is the first book where I have read where the main character's love interest is not, like the Mills and Boone kind of guy. He has
Yeah.
everything all together and so on. Yes, I like that. He was a hustler. He was trying to get his act together, but he hated Peckham.
Yes.
But he was still living in Peckham. What's
Yeah.
the story? What was it with Julian? I don't know. There was just something there.
I think again, it's that kind of like, so Peckham has for a long time has had a very negative association of crime, and obviously one of the most famous things was Damilala Taylor, his murder that happened in Peckham, and that became a massive issue, a nationwide issue. And again, there were stories written about, there's no like about the community in Peckham and how they're protecting the killers and how it's not safe, like all of this kind of stuff. Now it's very expensive to live in Peckham. My mother-in-law still lives there, but it's very expensive to live there. You can't. It's coming up in the world. There's a growing kind of like middle class white population who like it because it's trendy and it's a little bit edgy and all that kind of stuff. But then you have this population who still live there and have kind of grown through the or maybe they've have not just the associations but the trauma of living in a maligned neighborhood, whether that's kind of like police surveillance, whether that's just kind of youth violence that they've witnessed, that they've experienced. And so even though this neighborhood for perhaps me who or other people is like, Peckham, Little Lagos, it's like there's so many kind of like positive things, for them there's kind of that need to, or there's that want to get out to kind of prove yourself, like because you're from Peckham and it's there's certain associations, oh, you're never gonna make it, you're from a bad area, so in your mind getting out is kind of a sign of success. So I think that's where Julian's tension is. He wants something that proves that he's made it, that he's kind of ascended his or transcended the restrictions on his life, because he's still looking around and he's still seeing the problems that have always been there are there. So how do you get away from just those street issues, those kind of like hood issues that have been there all your life? And sometimes people feel like they have to leave to kind of get out of that, but at the same time it's almost hard for them to leave, whether psychologically or even just physically, like getting the money to kind of like move out. So I think there's definitely that love-hate relationship with him because of all of that.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to have any questions? Let me open. Yes, Alice, please go ahead. So I don't monopolize the conversation.
Hi, Jendella. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because we pretty much covered, but there were a couple of things that kind of stayed with me through the book. The first thing was, of course, the separation of the twins and how both have dealt with the situation. And especially for Glory, I'm not gonna lie, Glory was she was not my best friend for a while in the book. I was like, you need to get used. And maybe this is me being African. I am a first generation as well, immigrant. So I think there is too much of African in me. When I read that she hadn't completed her degree and her parents let it fly, I was like, in which word? That cannot be happening in an African family. Definitely something. But then when I kept on reading, I understood that they were dealing with the loss of their child as well. So they didn't want to push too much on the one that was still there. So I kind of understand where they were coming from. All of that to say that I was wondering what brought you to talk about subjects which are usually not so easily talked about within Afro-Caribbean families, such as her going to see a shrink, for example, or dealing with the fact that there is a lost child that is never talked about, that kind of big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. What is it that brought you to talk about it? Because not a lot of us will actually have bold enough to just go ahead and talk about it. So I wanted to know what really brought you into that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it was just that frustration. Just there is like so many, like I have friends who didn't complete their education, but their parents will never tell you that. Like I know because I'm their friend, but their parents will never say. So at one friend's at one friend's wedding, their best man actually made a joke alluding to the fact that they didn't finish university. And that was when we all realized that all the aunties and uncles in the room had no idea that this guy had dropped out of university. And it was like the scandal of the like at this point he's married. Do you know what I mean? Like we're past that. Like he's obviously doing fine, but no, it's the scandal of the wedding that so he didn't even graduate. Please, he's married. Like, what else do you want? So it was, so it's kind of like these real experiences of just silences, and it's just very frustrating to feel like you can't maybe ask the questions or have these conversations, because I think that ultimately, especially like kids who are growing up in a Western society that is very much kind of like where there seems to be no taboo, so everything's spoken about, everything's kind of like on the table, but then you're at home and you can't speak about certain things. It drives, I feel like it drives a wedge ultimately between parent and child that I don't believe should be there. Like in my opinion, I was very fortunate to grow up in a very loving family, and I always believe that the family should be the safe space. Like that should be the place where, you know, and now I'm a mom of 2 boys. Like if you feel like you can't say something outside, at least come to me and say it. Whatever it is, come to me. Oh, you did that thing that I told you not to do. Just tell me and we can deal with it. That's kind of the experience that because I didn't always, my parents were loving, but I didn't always have that. I knew there were certain things that I couldn't say, that I couldn't bring up, that I couldn't talk about. And it was only when I became like much older, an adult, and then my grandmother passed away and went to the funeral, went to the memorial, and then you're seeing all these tensions as an adult between different, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? And then I spoke to my mom, and my mom was like, well, here's the tea, and she told me all of these things. And now I'm like, so that's why when I was a child, and like everything starts to make sense, like things that you kind of thought, oh, that's just adults being strange or weird, or oh no, there was actually like real beef here. Like also that's why we never saw you at that person's house ever again and it's like, obviously there are certain conversations which are not inappropriate for children, but all of these silences, I don't think in the long run that like we need to find ways to talk about stuff that is uncomfortable, to talk about the things that cause pain ultimately, because it's like there's that saying like light is the best disinfectant. Like when we have all these secrets and all these things that are just festering, like ultimately I feel like it rots a lot of our relationships, especially intergenerationally. So that's why I just wanted to kind of talk about all these things and address all these things, because I think that's where healing happens as well, not just for like the individuals experiencing the pain, but also the families and kind of those tensions and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I feel that family, like, yeah, family should be it's not for obviously some people really come from really hard family environments, and they should obviously leave those environments and do what they need to do for themselves. But wherever possible, family should be a safe space, and your chosen, even if it's a chosen family, like not your biological family, whether it's a family you marry into, or it's your friend's family who you end up being like informally adopted into because your own home situation. I feel like that should be a safe space. So that's why I just wanted to kind of address all of these things, all at once, I guess.
Thank you. Hemelin, you want to say something? You have a question?
No, the explanation is good. It's good. I think it's pretty much accurate in terms of what the author is saying. So thank you for that.
Okay, so I want to go to the story of Hope. I personally felt the reunion was too easy. Yeah, I felt it was too easy because I was looking for drama. I was waiting to say, oh, let's see what happens. Because I thought that Hope would have a lot of blame in her. Oh, you guys abandoned me. You guys let me go. But I need clarification there. Why did Hope, because I'm looking at her mom, their mom, and I can't begin to imagine the trauma she went through as a mother. Because letting your child go, and in this kind of African, this is our African culture where the man is the head, you respect your husband, you honor your husband. I mean, I had seen an Indian film years ago where a father disowned his son and the mom had no say. And I was just like, why not fight him? Why not say no? And she stood there and said nothing. And this boy was sent away. So I can't begin to imagine the trauma the mother was going through. But why did Hope have to leave? Was it because her father beat her? Was it because she kept crying that she wanted to go back to that family? And the reunion, why was the reunion so easy? I expected drama.
I think I'll answer the second question first. I think that partly there was the practical issue that the book needed to come to an end. The book needed to come to an end. And so there needed to be a kind of soft-ish landing, but then at the same time, I didn't want to make it completely like, oh, everyone's kind of like happy clap. Like, I think that's why I left maybe a little bit of an opening at the end that, okay, they are kind of like there is a reunion, there is kind of some kind of like reconciliation, but in terms of what the future might be, I left that a little bit open because I think that, yeah, it's not going to be necessarily easy. Maybe even because I feel something like this, even in the moment, if you can take it in the moment and things seem nice, you're gonna go away, you're gonna think, you're gonna maybe come back with questions. So that's essentially why the reunion happened the way. And also I do like a happy ending, I can't lie, I do like a happy ending, so I wanted there to be some kind of reconciliation moment, even if a lot more needs to happen there ultimately, I think. In terms of why Hope had to leave, so there's the question of so obviously Kunle the dad he's portrayed as a quite kind of like hard or like proud man in that kind of aspect, and I think it was more the rejection was perhaps the first. Hope rejecting him perhaps as a father figure is like the first instance, but then at the time I think maybe a kind of buried nugget that perhaps wasn't as clear was that Celeste was actually going through postpartum depression after Victor was born. So that kind of like complication with one of your children leaving or kind of going away, but then you still have to deal with kind of like the aftermath of having another child and all that kind of thing, probably left more time than was necessary for any kind of reconciliation to kind of like happen then. But it was initially because Kunle was kind of just, I shouldn't laugh because it's not funny, but he was offended at his daughter's rejection. He beat his daughter in a very horrific way. Celeste was scared for her daughter, but also scared about her whole situation, dealing with postpartum depression, and that's essentially why Hope went away in the first instance. As to why she didn't come back, I think there is probably an element of choice in that. So Hope's character was based lightly based on someone that I know who chose to stay, who's, when their parents came to kind of take them, they said, no, I don't want to go back with you. And they chose at a very young age to kind of like stay with their parents, their foster parents. So that's kind of where her character kind of came from. And yeah, I don't know if I've answered that well enough, but that's kind of the thinking behind that.
Okay. And then her sister Faith, that was,
Yeah.
for me, was supposed to be a typical Stepford wife. She had everything all figured out. But her husband, I don't know, there was just a question. What was the deal with him?
Yes. So her husband, I think that Faith is perhaps following a little bit too closely in her mother's steps in terms of a husband who provides and does everything that they are quote unquote need to do, but is probably lacking in the empathy, emotional capacity department. So a lot of people say, oh, was he cheating on her? Was he being kind of like unfaithful? In my mind, he wasn't. He was just being a not just, because it's not just, but he was being a stereotypical quote unquote African man who just who's just emotionally disconnected from his wife and his wife's needs and what she actually wants for their family. So that was kind of more his situation. I don't, maybe if there was a sequel we'd find out something else about Michael, but yeah, he was just a stereotypical emotionally disconnected man.
Yeah, because if there's a sequel, yes, I know we want to know more about Michael, we want to know more about Julianne. And yeah, Alice, I see your hand up.
I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying, because it felt, for me, it felt like they both got married pretty young, and in a situation where it was not, yes, they choose to be together, but it was kind of forced by life, by the events that they were going through. So I felt like because they were not addressing those issues, that kind of laid into the relationship, and slowly, where they were both, each and every one of us grow differently. We deal with issues differently. We grieve relationship differently. And it felt for me like they were growing apart. And since they were not communicating about those issues, it kind of built a gap in between the two of them. For me, was not that the relationship. I didn't even think about the cheating part. I thought about, this is unfortunate, because if they could sit together and have a conversation about why and how this relationship is slowly dying, it will be resolved. Because the reason why I'm saying that is, when Glory was having a conversation with her brother-in-law, you can feel the love that he still has for his wife. He just doesn't know how to deal with certain things, and he doesn't know how to talk about it with her. So for me, it was like, oh, this is a very, it's a miss. If they could just sit down and talk.
Marriage counseling. Yeah. I think unfortunately that is the reality of a lot of marriages. Like, life happens, things, the pace, especially when you have children, the pace at which things move at, there's not always just the time to sit down, or it feels like there's not the time to just sit down and have these conversations and kind of reconnect on a very emotional level. Like, I have friends who described marriage as feeling like a business partnership some of the time. Like, you're just in the business of trying to keep family going, whether that's getting the kids to school, putting them to bed, getting to work. Like, you're in the business of keeping this going, but you have to make time for those emotional connections, as you said. And I think that yeah, unfortunately, that is where a lot of modern marriage kind of start to break apart.
Okay, and then you brought in therapy.
Yeah.
So me, I'm still very Nigerian. I'm still, it's like, mine is as bad as reading self-help books. I always go, why are you telling me what I already know? What common sense? What my common sense? Because you've been able to put common sense into a book, and then you expect me to read it. So I'm still of that school of thoughts. I'm still too Nigerian. I don't know if I can sit before a therapist and be vulnerable.
Mm.
But and I think that is something, again, one challenge the Black community has. I can't keep
Yeah.
like, for Black men is a struggle. I feel women are more likely to seek therapy if referred than Black men.
Yes, not 100%. And I think that one thing that is important to note is that if you have a strong community network of people that you can go to, people that you can open up to, that you can have honest conversation with, you might not need therapy. Like, you might have all of that support that you need, and it doesn't have a label. It's just your network of friends and family, but you have those kind of outside perspectives that can reframe things for you, or you have someone who cares enough about you to kind of pull you back from maybe negative self-talk or negative self-view. So I think it's important to note that some people have the benefits of therapy, but through their kind of like network. But again, I think for Black men, where I think they are, or masculinity as it is presented to them includes stoicism. It includes, the idea that you're not emotional when really all you're doing is suppressing your emotions. I think that they probably need therapy the most. The most, if I'm being honest, they do. But I get, like, there's ideas about masculinity, there's kind of ideas about the kind of person that goes to therapy. There's all these kind of things. I've been in and out. I've been to therapy, I've been to couples counseling, I've been to single person counseling, like, or just like normal like one-on-one therapy. I've done this like a number of times. So I'm a big fan of, when you need the help, going. It's not something that you have to do for your whole life. It might just be to get you through a certain season. It might be, for some people I know with severe mental health issues, is years that they are in therapy before they feel like, okay, I can stop that, and I can I've developed enough kind of coping mechanisms, or I've learned enough, or I've passed through this point, so now I don't need it. But yeah, I think therapy is important, and where therapy is perhaps not a option because of cost, access, or just because, again, like you said, you find it hard to open up to a stranger, essentially, just having people that you can go to and you can open up to and you can talk to and you can get third-party perspectives on your situation or how you're feeling or your own kind of thoughts, that is so important. Because I don't know, Western society kind of isolates you a lot, whether it's through working patterns, whether it's through again, the pace of life and all that kind of thing. So it's important to have just places to like offload and to kind of different perspectives introduced, essentially.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Jendella? Okay, so I want to go to Glory.
Wait, I wanted to ask, like, in terms of the therapy, like, is the population white therapists, or who? Do we have a large population of Black therapists where you come from? Because that's an issue.
That is a big issue. There's a network called the Black and Asian Therapist Network in the UK, and it is kind of like private, so a lot of it is paid, although there are some therapists who offer kind of like a pay scale for like people of different incomes. But that's kind of where you can go and you can find kind of, I guess, culturally specific therapists through that. There's also a charity that was set up in 2020 called Black Minds Matter UK, which have they fund, I think it's a 6 or a 12-week program of therapy or counseling sessions with Black therapists. So I think the awareness of that is growing, and those options are becoming more accessible and more visible. And even there's like, I'm noticing more and more, especially in London, more kind of like community groups where it's not necessarily the typical you and one person talking, but it's kind of like a group of people who come together, and they might discussions. Some people call it sister circles, or there's other kind of or group therapy, where you're with a bunch of people who maybe are dealing with similar things, whether it's kind of grief or loss or depression, or more kind of like specific mental health issues, and it's led by a Black practitioner, often a Black woman, the ones that I've all come across, and you're with other Black women and you're kind of talking. So I feel like there are more options where that kind of culturally specific support is available, because the very first therapist I saw was a very young, very nice white lady, and it was fine. But after that, when I then was fortunate enough to have like a Black woman therapist, I noticed an immediate kind of difference, especially after I lost my mom. I had 12 weeks of counseling with a Black woman, and that probably was one of the most transformational kind of, I guess, relationships that I had, just because she understood so much of the cultural, she wasn't Nigerian, but she understood so much of the cultural pressures, expectations, fears, and the background that I was coming from.
Okay, thank you. Lola, I see your hand up. Lola is actually a therapist.
Oh.
Yes.
Hi, Jendella. Thank you for the book. I enjoyed it. I did, like everybody else, have a few questions here and there. So my thing is, why did Hope's parents say she was dead? Because it sounds like from the book, her mom still visited until the family moved. So why the pretense that she was dead and all this secrecy and all of that? What was that about? Because now they're gonna have to say she's not dead. They're gonna undead her, really, you know.
Yeah.
So what was that about, really?
So I think that, if I'm correct, I need to remember if I'm correct, but I think that I never actually wrote that Celeste or Kunle said that she was dead. It was more like an inference that was made by the community, and then that story kind of continued, and it's like the lie that doesn't get debunked becomes the truth ultimately. So yeah, I think it basically speaking to that, like when you leave gaps, people fill gaps.
Right.
People
Yes,
fill
this is
gaps
true.
with the thing that makes the most sense to them. So yeah, and I think that the coming from like a Yoruba background as well, a child's death is probably something that's just easier to not speak about. If you let people think that like, you don't, like, parents don't go to their children's funerals, if you just let, it's something that is easier to kind of like be left alone, and kind of, it sounds bad, but quick, like moved on from, like, it's kind of the thing that's not spoken about. From my experience, a child's death is kind of just left as it is. So it was kind of perhaps the easiest thing to run with, or to allow to become the truth, rather than the messy details of like the real story.
Okay, thank you.
And then before you go, I know you said you had just 45 minutes. I was going to touch on the prison system. Yeah. So from the look of things here, her brother was guilty by association. Yeah, because I had read somewhere where in the US, if 5 people go to rob and one gets killed, the other 4 are charged for murder or manslaughter.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that justice system in the UK.
Yeah, so it's called joint enterprise, and it's a very controversial law that kind of that is kind of brought into, in a very cynical view, to kind of just round up certain demographics of people and get them into prison. From a very cynical view, I guess, from the maybe proponents of the law would say that it's to discourage involvement of all kinds. So after I wrote Hope and Glory, this is an actual case that happened, which if I had written it, I don't think people would have believed it, but it actually happened, whereby after the death of their friend, so there was a boy that was killed in Manchester, a group of his friends were in a group chat, and they were basically expressing their rage and how they felt about their friend being murdered. And those chat logs were basically used to convict the boys of conspiracy. I think it was to commit GBH. I need to double check, but they're called the Manchester 10. So there were 10 young boys who were basically convicted on the basis of a group chat where they were expressing their grief, their frustration, their anger, maybe what they would want to do to the person who killed their friend. Nothing actually happened, but they were convicted based on that. I actually know of stories of people who are serving like 18-year sentences for conspiracy, which is essentially they were planning to do something that didn't happen, but because they planned to do it and it was found that they had planned to do it, they're convicted on the basis of conspiracy, whether that's kind of like conspiracy to smuggle drugs or conspiracy to sell drugs or whatever else. So joint enterprise is part of that, and it's kind of like the idea that if something happens and you had some involvement in that thing happening, you are culpable for that involvement. So there's been cases where boys have been in a group like talking, some of those boys then later have gone off to commit a crime, whether that's kind of like a physical attack or whatever, but because all the boys were talking beforehand, it can be inferred that they were discussing the crime that was about to happen. So therefore they were culpable to that. And the more that I talk about it, just the more ridiculous it sounds, because it is ridiculous. Because first of all, it's often used against white working class boys, Black boys as well, because there's this idea of the gang mentality. You're all a gang, so the reason why you're friends is because you are friends because you want to commit crime, like that. Like there's that assumption that the criminality is already there, so any misadventure that happens was obviously a clearly like criminal plot that was planned. But yeah, it's like, it's horrific because there are a ridiculous amount of young men in prison based on, as I said, mostly Black or white working class, who are there because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, talking to the wrong place, or they are associated with someone who did something that was wrong. And even it kind of expands out with, there's something that was, I think it's been dismantled now, but there was something called the gangs matrix, where basically if you were known to police in a certain area, you were put into this database that basically calculated your likelihood of being in a gang based on factors such as what school you went to, where you live, who lived at home with you, who they knew you had associations with. So like this essentially like algorithm comes up with how likely you are to be part of a gang. So when something happens in that area, the police are coming to knock at your door because the algorithm says that you are this much likely to be in a gang. So it is a very insidious part of British law, which people are attacking bit by bit. And at the end of the book, obviously there's that kind of like groundbreaking decision that the Supreme Court ruled that it was kind of like unlawful, which did happen. But what I didn't include in the book, because as I said, I like happy endings, was that the first challenge to that, so the first case that was brought in order about like a what's it called, a joint enterprise case that was kind of brought and said, can we review this case in like the Supreme Court decision, it was struck down. So even though the Supreme Court has ruled that it's been used unlawfully, there has been no success in overturning any kind of joint enterprise conviction to this day, as far as I'm aware. And as I said, there are still people who are essentially being convicted under the same law, just a slightly different name.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, before my last question and we wrap up, can we take our group photo? Because sometimes so we don't forget. So if you have a copy of the book, if you don't have a copy, it's fine. Ebook, whatever, yeah, we'll just take a. Okay, Alice, we're waiting for you. Annette, where's your book?
I had gotten it from the library, so I don't have a copy.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, everybody, big smile. Jendella, where's your copy? You're the author.
It's next door. It's next door. I can go get it. Oh, okay, 1 second.
Yeah, get it. We'll wait. Ooh, time really flies. Let me see, 2:02 already. Wow. Okay, fantastic. Alice, we see you. Thank you.
Oh, let me turn off. How do I turn off my thing? 'Cause you can't even see it. I'll put it in front of my face.
Okay, okay. Big smile, everyone.
We want to see your face, Jendella. Just
No,
put it on.
yeah. Okay, yeah, it's okay like this. Yeah. Lola, we can't see. Where's your book? Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so I was going to ask, yes. So back to our least favorite character, Glory. Why? So my question here is it the fact that she dropped out of school, or is it the fact that she went to LA and had that unfulfilled dream of being a success and living that Instagram fake life that made her so pushy and annoying? Like, what was it with that character? I don't know. Why did you make her that way? Because we usually are supposed to empathize with our main character. We're supposed to love her, you know, but this one, I was just like, okay, what's she saying to Julian again? Why is Julian still talking to her? And then you also emphasizing that she was on her period.
Yeah.
Yeah, the point. Yeah, so why?
I think why? I think that because she was so unhappy with her life.
Okay.
I think, first of all, I think that Glory, in essence, like her personality is that she's quite forthright, quite kind of very like direct, kind of forthright in and of herself. But I think that because she was unhappy with her life, she was very judgmental of other people. So whether that's judgmental of her sister, whether that's judgmental even of her, like her mom, I think that when you're not happy, you can be very kind of, you deflect your unhappiness onto other people rather than kind of like facing up to your own ish that you need to deal with. So I think that that is essentially why she was and I mean, some people have said that it's an agenda against middle children. Some people have said that, well, that's just what middle sisters are like. Other people have said, no, it's an agenda against middle sisters. I think that, I think that being a middle child played a role in it. But I think that that's just who she is. She's just very forthright, but she still had a lot to learn in terms of how to like deal with other people, how to deal with disappointment, and just the fact that you know, she's not the center of the universe, but yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have any more questions for Jendella before we let her go? Because she said 45 minutes and yay, she's been here for what, 1 hour?
I just want to say I'm not the camp that hates Glory, mind you. I love Glory.
Oh, really?
I just realized that Glory had many problems. You know, because I think there's a part of her that recognized that her sister was not dead, but she didn't know the full story. You know, and so there was a lot of that. And yes, she's an independent child, and so she saw things very differently from her family, even from her sister Faith. This is why they butted heads. So for me, I really like Glory. I just she needed to grow up. She needed to confront herself so that she can be good with the world, you know. So that was my take of Glory. I liked her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same here. I like Glory too.
Oh, you like Glory too? Okay, so that's just
yeah. I think it's okay to be different. I think it's contradictions, and because somebody cannot handle a person talking, they don't have to judge, because people are giving her the same energy that they didn't want from her, and she was not backing down. But even when the mom came around to talk to her, they both were able to have conversations. And the mom was actually admiring Glory. Even if Glory was annoying to her, she knew this was the child that she can rely on. And people like Glory are the ones that you don't forget. They make you know that they're present. So to be calm and quiet and just prim and proper is not always going to get you what you want. Exactly. So I like Glory too. I'm Team Glory.
Yeah.
But I don't
I didn't like Faith.
Jendella, I'm not sure you answered the period question. Sorry.
Yes.
You know why I think she was on her because this is a very because I didn't want her to have sex with Julian the first time that they were together. I wanted there to be a reason why they didn't, even immediately sleep with each other. Like I wanted them to have that sense of like intimacy without the sex. So I think it was very much just kind of like it was a cock block essentially.
Because I mean, I was reading it and I was like,
Thank you.
but I was reading it and I'm like, but some Niger guys be like, I don't mind.
Well, yeah.
It seems like Julian didn't mind too. Like he was
Yeah.
all for it, but he was like, no.
Yeah, it was a chance for Julian to be a gentle and just show that, you know, I'm not just here for the set. Like I actually do just want to chill with you. It was an opportunity for Julian to, you know, show his empathetic, just like lover boy side, I think.
Okay. Alice, okay, before we let her go. Yes, Alice.
For me, it's not a question, it's more a comment. I just wanted to thank you, Jendella, because you allowed us to have conversation around some subjects that we wouldn't have thought about just, talking about. So very rarely would you have a book that mentioned postnatal issues. Very rarely do you have a book where you can find menstruation. Which is really weird. It comes every month, and I mean, like they should get used to it. For me, it's just it was a great opportunity. It was a great conversation opener, and I want to take the time to thank you for giving us the opportunity through your book to actually view and inform ourselves. I learned today, and I'm going to educate myself on the subject about the private fostering. I have never heard about it. So this was really a great book. It was a book that has helped us. I usually live in Ottawa. Today, exceptionally, I'm visiting my brother in US, but it's not subject that we have or come across the community, the Afro-Caribbean community on a regular basis. So having a book that allows us to have those conversations, I feel like it was a blessing for us. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Alice. Lala, I see your hand up.
Ooh,
yes,
sorry.
hello, Miss England. Good morning from where I am. Thank you for your book. So fortunately and unfortunately, I read your book months ago. So, and I enjoyed it. I just want to say thank you. And I hope we get more from where that came from.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
hopefully next year I have a book coming out. So, yeah.
Okay, keep us posted. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful story with a happy ending. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Does anybody else? So we can let her go. We've kept her for 15 minutes over. Anyway, we're always this great. Jendella, I would just want to please give her some hearts, everybody, in your reactions buttons. Please give her some hearts. Yes, that's how we are. Yes. I just want to say a very big thank you. Thank you so much. Bukola can't be here today. I mean, she sent a message, yes, to say she couldn't be here today. But I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for this lovely book. Thank you also for honoring our invitation and yeah, just spending your afternoon. I don't know if it's evening there, but here is 11 a.m. to 1. So just spending your time with us today. So thank you very, very much. Someday, maybe when we are in the UK, we could give you a call and meet in Peckham. You know, there used to be this hair shop. Is it Shola or something with a Yoruba name? There used to be this hair shop with a big sign then on the streets of Peckham before that bridge.
Oh,
It used to be on the left. I don't know if it's, I've forgotten what it's called, but I remember a lot of people that used to be our landmark to say, oh yeah, you are in Peckham. But yes, but thank you so much for bringing Peckham back to us. And yeah, a bit of Niger. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I've got a list of other. So if you're interested in private fostering, I have a list of books and films that kind of go into that more, and I can share that with Louisa afterwards, and you can share with everyone else. But yeah, that gives you more context to like different experiences.
Okay, please do share with me so I can share with every other person. Okay, so I'll put up this video. That's our chat with Jendella on YouTube, so you can share with your friends. All right, so thank you so much and have a lovely Saturday.
All right,
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.